Quick thought experiment. Imagine a language that's been more or less asleep for, say, 1700 years. Not dead, not forgotten, but preserved, like an heirloom sweater. Taken out for special occasions, maybe whispered in prayer, but never yelled in traffic, never gossiped in, never used to say, pass the fries. And now it's the language your toddler throws tantrums in. The language of pop songs, Tinder dates, military orders, existential jokes, startup pitches. That language is Hebrew. And today, we're talking about how it came back to life, but not in some textbook linguistic theory kind of way. This is about people, immigrants, dreamers, poets, parents who needed a language to feel like themselves and ended up reinventing one in the process. So here's the deal. For close to 2,000 years, Hebrew wasn't something you actually spoke. Not day to day, not to your mom, not to your mailman. It was a written language, a sacred language. You'd read it in the Torah, chant it in a synagogue, maybe scribble a line of poetry in it if you were extra devoted. But you wouldn't exactly use it to flirt. It was there, alive in ritual, asleep in reality. Jews across the diaspora spoke a whole mix of other languages. So Yiddish, Ladino, which is kind of like Judeo-Spanish. So Romance language primarily spoken by Sephardic Jews. And there was Judeo-Arabic, Russian, Polish, French, whatever they picked up. But Hebrew stayed. Otherworldly, special, like Latin, but with more emotion. And the wild thing, it wasn't forgotten. It was memorized, maintained, studied, not by governments, not by armies, but by people. Kids learned it in religious schools. Poets whispered it into diaries. Scholars argued about its grammar like it mattered, which to them it did. And then in the late 1800s, something started to shift. Not overnight, not with fanfare, just a growing murmur. What if Hebrew could be more than sacred? What if it could be ours again? You know, for everyday life? That's where things get spicy. So, who actually had the audacity to look at this beautifully ancient, carefully preserved language and say, you know what? Let's make it casual. That would be Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, the man, the myth, the very intense mustache. So, picture this. It's the 1880s. Eliezer's living in the Ottoman-ruled Jerusalem, surrounded by people who speak Arabic, Ladino, Yiddish, and Hebrew only in synagogue. He looks around and goes, nope. Full Hebrew, full time. He means it. He and his wife decide Hebrew or bust. They make a pact, no other languages at home. And when their son is born in 1882, they stick to it. He grows up hearing only Hebrew, which means this tiny baby is basically the world's first native speaker of modern Hebrew. Now, here's a plot twist. This wasn't cute to everyone. The story goes, other parents were horrified. They thought it was blasphemous, even dangerous. But Ben-Yehuda unshaken. While raising his child in a language no one else was speaking, he was also writing newspaper columns in Hebrew. He was also making up new words every day. Need a word for ice cream? Glida. He pulls it from a root that means ice. Need a word for identity? Zeut, from the root for this is. Need a word for omelet? Avita. No one knows exactly why that one caught on, but it's got a nice crackle to it. And these weren't random stabs in the dark. He was a systematic guy. He built a whole dictionary, one that pulled from biblical sources, sure, but also made space for trains, telegraphs, and toothpaste. That's the trick. He wasn't just reviving a language. He was stretching it, giving it elbows, letting it bump into modern life and say, excuse me, I live here now. And people started to follow his lead, slowly, cautiously, some out of admiration. Some out of practicality, some because, well, once your kid speaks Hebrew, you kind of have to catch up. But By the time Ben-Yehuda died in 1922, Hebrew had been officially recognized as one of the languages of British Mandate Palestine. From please rise for the Torah reading to that's my seat on the bus. It was happening. A whole language reborn in real time with real people, and one very stubborn family at the heart of it. Okay, so Hebrew is back. Kind of. People are trying, but what they're trying to do is wild, because think about it. They're not just reviving a language, they're dragging it across centuries, from prophets to plumbers, from psalms to soccer. And what happens when a language gets pulled through time like that? It starts to change. Because it has to. The Hebrew you'll hear on the streets of Tel Aviv today, it doesn't sound like the Hebrew of the Torah. It doesn't even sound like what Ben-Yehuda spoke to his kid in 1882. It's faster, rougher, looser, louder. But so does the R sound. In biblical Hebrew, it was likely a rolled or flapped R, kind of like Spanish. But in Israeli Hebrew today, it's got that French uvular kind of R down in the throat, like you're gargling your feelings. Then there's stress. Ancient Hebrew had its own patterns, but in modern speech, stress tends to fall toward the end of the word, unless it doesn't. Because like all living languages, Hebrew is happily inconsistent when it wants to be. And pronunciation, total mashup. You've got the Ashkenazi influence, long Oz, a sing-songy Yiddish rhythm. You've got the Sephardi bass, crisper vowels, cleaner endings. And then you've got the whole influx of modern Hebrew slang from English, Russian, Arabic, and military jargon. Seriously, the army is like its own dialect. And don't even get me started on borrowed words. Like Google, that's legagel. Right? It's changed. And the Academy of the Hebrew Language, the official body that oversees all this, keeps trying to coin pure Hebrew alternatives for things like laptop. But honestly, most people just say laptop. Sorry, Academy. That's kind of the paradox here. There's this very real reverence for the past, for the sacredness of the language, and there's also the total joy of messing with it, remixing it, letting it stretch and bend and do what languages are meant to do, to live. Modern Hebrew is full of texture. Some phrases come straight out of the Bible. Some are Soviet imports. Some were probably made up by teenagers in Herzliya last year. And now they're in a pop song, and together they all work because Hebrew isn't precious anymore. It's personal. You're not just reciting it. You're texting in it. You're arguing in it. You're falling in love in it. Language doesn't get more alive than that. Up till now, we've talked about Ben-Yehuda, the father of modern Hebrew, but no language grows up on grammar alone. What Hebrew needed next was feeling, music, soul. So enter Chaim Nachman Bialik, born 1873, Ukraine, raised on scripture, steeped in tradition, deeply, deeply Jewish, but also wildly modern, sensitive, angry, in love with beauty, and not remotely interested in keeping Hebrew locked in some dusty book. Bialik didn't just write in Hebrew, he cracked it open. He wrote poems that sounded like prayers, but they weren't. He took the rhythms of ancient Hebrew and used them to talk about heartbreak, longing, childhood, grief, shame, laughter, all the messy human stuff that didn't usually make it into religious Hebrew, but lived right there in Bialik's stanzas. One of his most famous poems, In the City of Slaughter, written after the Kishinev pogrom in 1903, an unspeakable massacre of Jews in what's now Moldova. Bialik traveled there, talked to survivors, came home and wrote a piece that ripped people apart. It wasn't gentle, it was metaphorical. It asked, why didn't we fight back? The poem sparked outrage and action. Jewish youth movements cited it as a turning point, a call to arms, literally and culturally. Because suddenly, Hebrew wasn't just the language of survival or prayer, it became a language of protest, a language of fire. But Bialik didn't stay in that one mode. He also wrote children's poetry, gentle lullabies, wordplay, and wonder, like Nad Neda, Seesaw, where he turns a playground into a moment of existential back and forth, because even his kiddie poems had depth, obviously. And here's the kicker. Kids learned Bialik's poems in school, and so did their parents, which means suddenly Hebrew was this intergenerational thing, a link, a rhythm, a shared voice. And Bialik, for all his seriousness, knew what was at stake. He once said, and I'm paraphrasing here, without Hebrew, you are like a translated Jew. You're living someone else's story in someone else's words. He wasn't talking about fluency, he was talking about belonging. That's what Bialik gave Hebrew. A place to feel, not just to argue and or define or instruct, but to ache, to imagine, and to remember. Ben-Yehuda made Hebrew possible, but Bialik made it beautiful. Here's the wild thing. Hebrew worked. It came back. It's not a museum piece. It's the language of startup founders and bus drivers, of beat poets and bureaucrats. It's how people order coffee. It's how kids scream at each other on TikTok. It's how couples fight at IKEA in the lighting section, which honestly is where all real fights happen. Revival isn't the same as resolution, because bringing Hebrew back didn't erase the tensions. It amplified them. There's still this constant tug of war between the pure and the practical, between the official terms handed down by the academy and what people actually say. When to say email in Hebrew, there's an official word, doar elektroni. Want to guess what people actually say? Email. The academy tries. Every year they drop new Hebrew terms for modern things, like tafsan for emoji, from to express. But let's be real. Most people say emoji because languages don't follow rules. They follow humans. And modern Hebrew, it's full of humans. Humans with different accents, Russian, Moroccan, Ethiopian, American, with different histories, different relationships to this language. And for some, it was inherited. For others, it was learned as an adult. For many, it still feels like a second skin. Beautiful, functional, but a little tight in places. Hebrew didn't come back because someone wrote a rule book. It came back because people needed it. They needed to call things by their names, to tell stories, to connect, to imagine something bigger and something shared. Whether you speak Hebrew fluently, awkwardly, half-heartedly, half-forgottenly, whether it's your childhood language or something you're just curious about now, it's not a test. It's an invitation. Languages don't live in dictionaries. They live in mouths, in ears, in pause buttons, and eye rolls, and accents. And I don't know how to say this, but I'll try anyway. That's what Hebrew is now. Not sacred or perfect, but real, alive, and still in process. So maybe next time you hear it on a street corner, in a song, in your own head, you'll think, wow, this thing, it used to be asleep. And now it's breathing, just like us. Oh, and hey, if you want more episodes like this one, or just want to make sure you don't miss the next linguistic rabbit hole we tumble into together, check out the description. There's a link to sign up for my newsletter, short, sweet, and voice nerdy, just like this. This was Carrie, the Beyond the Accent podcast. I'm so glad you were here. Talk to you soon. Don't be asleep. Listen up. Speak up. The whole deal. Talk soon.